I nodded thank you when the CEO shook my hand and said my role was no longer needed, smiled while security waited, and walked out without a scene. They thought silence meant surrender. 14 days later, the patent I designed, protected, and quietly retained rights to sold for $1.1 billion to their biggest competitor. The board panicked. The CEO called. Lawyers scrambled. I didn't celebrate. I documented. This isn't about revenge fantasies or shouting matches. It's about what happens when experience is dismissed, paperwork is ignored, and a woman who understands leverage decides to finally use it properly decisively alone. My name is Evelyn Monroe, and the day I was fired didn't feel dramatic the way people imagine betrayal should, because it happened quietly, professionally, with smiles and rehearsed gratitude, the kind that makes you doubt your own anger, and the CEO even stood to shake my hand, thanked me for my years of service, and said the company was evolving, which I understood immediately meant evolving away from women who remembered too much, questioned too carefully, and refused to be decorative, and I nodded, said thank you, gathered my things, and walked out past security without a scene, because after 31 years in corporate innovation and intellectual property strategy, I had learned that silence unsettles people far more than protest. And what none of them noticed in that room was that my calm wasn't acceptance, it was calculation, because the truth was I hadn't just overseen the development of their flagship technology, I had architected its legal spine, negotiated its international protections, and structured its ownership in a way that preserved continuity even if leadership changed, something I had done years earlier after watching a brilliant colleague pushed out and erased from her own work, and at the time executives praised my foresight without understanding it. Because they trusted loyalty more than language, and I let them, and when I arrived home that afternoon, I didn't cry or vent or call anyone, I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and reviewed documents I knew by heart, confirming what I already suspected, that the patent portfolio generating most of the company's valuation required my authorization for transfer under specific post-employment conditions. Conditions they had just triggered by terminating me without cause or transition, and I smiled then, not out of malice, but clarity, because systems don't care about ego, and 14 days passed quietly while they celebrated internally, announced leadership shifts, and reassured investors, and during that time I received messages from former colleagues expressing shock, sympathy, curiosity, and I responded politely but vaguely, because patience was doing its work. And on day 14 I accepted a call from a competitor whose legal team had once tried unsuccessfully to license the same patent, a company that treated expertise like currency instead of ornament, and when I explained my position, they didn't argue or posture, they verified, validated, and moved efficiently. And within 72 hours the deal was done, $1.1 billion transferred, fully compliant, irrevocable, and clean, and I remember how surreal it felt watching the confirmation arrive, not because of the number, but because the decision itself felt inevitable, like gravity finally asserting itself, and when my former company realized what had happened, the reaction was immediate and chaotic, emergency board meetings, frantic emails marked urgent, legal threats written hastily and abandoned just as fast, and the CEO called me directly for the first time since my termination, his voice tight, asking how I could do this, and I reminded him calmly that I hadn't done anything new, I had simply exercised rights they had approved and ignored, and when he accused me of disloyalty, I reminded him loyalty assumes mutual respect, and when legal tried intimidation, I forwarded documentation bearing their signatures, clauses they had skimmed, and safeguards they had dismissed as excessive, and the tone shifted quickly after that, because leverage doesn't negotiate, it informs, and the weeks that followed were loud for them and quiet for me. Analysts questioned governance, shareholders demanded explanations, leadership quietly reshuffled, and suddenly my name appeared everywhere after years of strategic invisibility, and people asked if I felt satisfied, but satisfaction wasn't the emotion, it was resolution, because for decades I had absorbed assumptions, smoothed over arrogance, and protected people who never bothered to understand the systems they benefited from, and selling the patent wasn't revenge, it was closure, it validated my work in a way applause never could, and I retired shortly after on my own terms, consulting selectively, mentoring younger women who had watched what happened and finally understood why documentation matters more than gratitude, and sometimes I think about that handshake, the CEO thanking me as if appreciation replaced diligence, and I smile. Because the most underestimated person in any room is the one who nods politely while keeping records, and I never raised my voice, never threatened, never dramatized my exit. I simply allowed the structure to function as designed, and when it did, the outcome wasn't chaos, it was correction. And that correction cost them far more than keeping me ever would have, but that was their lesson to learn, not mine. And when people now ask how to handle betrayal, I tell them the truth, that power doesn't shout, it documents, it waits, and when the moment comes, it moves without apology, and that is how a quiet goodbye turned into the most definitive statement of my entire career.